about doing was just talking about getting a good bagpipe sound. And that's, of course, setup, blowing pressure control, and just kind of understanding how to time the warm-up procedure just right so that you have your best sound on the stage and not in the tuning room. But if you guys have other pressing things that you'd like to discuss or whatever, I'm totally up for that. Or if you just have some questions, do that too. Or what do you think? Does that sound all right? Does that sound useful?
Yeah.
Okay. So I think one of the first things people talk a lot about or have questions about is like, what drum reeds do you play? You know, or what bags do you play? And those things can make a big difference, especially when you're practicing an hour a day. If you can find something that's just even fractionally better, you know, over when you spread out all that practice time over years, it can make your life a lot easier. But I would say almost anything that's, you know, on the market is good, and you have good players playing, right? So a good player can kind of get a great sound out of any of the products that are out there. So I do think it's kind of immaterial to really focus too much on that type of thing. But if you're curious, I can of course tell you that. It was we had a little like goofy sort of like podcast thing, me and a buddy, and we would just sort of ask those like generic interview questions. And one of them was always, "What drone reeds do you play?" You know, because I really don't think it matters all that much. Okay, all the drone reeds out there are going to give you a good sound, and we don't all need to sound the same, right? So sometimes though, if you hear someone that's got a different sound or something that really appeals to you, sure, it's a worthwhile question, but I wouldn't try to chase down a certain setup as like some sort of grail bagpipe setup. But bagpipe setup is kind of crucial, sort of the starting point, setup, maintenance, all that. We don't really need to talk about that, right? The maintenance side, you know, have your drones hemped up and make sure your bag's airtight, and that stuff's kind of obvious. What I play is I play a sheepskin bag for solos, and then I've got a canister system inside it. But I'm probably the only person I know that does that. A lot of people will play just a straight sheepskin or play a canister in a synthetic bag, or they'll play a sheepskin with like the tubes that you fill up. Bannatyne makes one, Bruce Hitchings makes one.
Do you play the sheep for comfort, or do you think it actually sounds different, better?
I play it because it's wet right away, right? So it starts wet, but then it absorbs moisture, so it doesn't get as wet. So basically, you know, it still gets more wet as I play, but let's say it starts at 4 and I end up at 7, as opposed to a synthetic where I'm starting at 0 and ending at 10. So it's just a little different. I'm going to get a stable sound a little sooner. Maybe can't play as long as a synthetic, but that's just what I do. So jitter. The jitter is like the basis of our sound, right? Because what do? We tune the drones to the low end. So everything starts with the low end, right? And one of the biggest issues I hear, heard it today, hear it all the time teaching at the school, is the low A is not blown where the low A is going to be stable. So like there's this sort of chain of chain of events that come from that, where like you're fighting with the drones, trying to get them locked, but the issue kind of comes back to not blowing the chanter in the right spot. So does anyone know, okay, get my chanter and put it in, how do I know how hard to blow? We all know I should blow my chanter steady, right? How hard or soft do I blow my chanter? What feedback can I get from the chanter to tell me exactly where that chanter wants to be played at? Anyone?
Clear out. You blow till you get the high A to go out, and then you want to come back from that. Is that what trying to find the sweet spot?
So you mean like with the scratchy high A or something like that? Yeah. So that's one way to do it. So if you blow, you can kind of.
I just learned that yesterday.
blow your high A.
Don't think.
Blow your high A kind of as soft as you can get a really nice sounding high A, and that'll be a good spot to do it. I think there's a pretty easy way to figure out sort of objectively where your tuner wants to be played at. I've got a tuner up here. And what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna blow the tuner until the low A activates, right? So I really can't underblow the low A to start it sounding, right? And everyone's issue, if there's an issue with instability, tends to be blowing the high A at a higher pressure than the low A, right? So let me double tap this. This is quite sensitive, but you saw how where it came in, it just sort of stayed there, maybe dropped one, but pretty much right there, right? I'm going to do it again. Again, it's coming right back in tune, right? I don't have some special ability to blow at the exact same pressure. It's just that's when the reed comes in. It comes in there. So I can always blow that low A at the exact same pitch when I come in on it, right? Now once I come in on that low A, I will be able to underblow it a lot, right? Watch this. You see how much it'll drop? So there's a big, when I come in, I'm basically at the ceiling, and then I can really drop the floor way down, but I've got to keep the blowing all the way up, right? So if you're unsure if you're if you're underblowing it or not, a really easy thing to do is cut your tuner out and then come back in. And if all of a sudden the low A jumped up, you were underblowing your low A before that. Now I'm going to do it again. I'm going to come in on that low A, and I'm going to try to actually overblow it. And you're going to see the low A really doesn't want to move. I can't blow it harder, right? If it was a really easy read, I could, but you would know you're blowing it too hard because it would squeal and gargle and make horrific noises, right? So you see that basic concept of if I'm blowing my low A correctly, it's at the top of the low A range. You with me? And it's the same pressure that it will activate. I cannot underblow my low A to start the low A. And I really can't overblow it from that point either. That's the spot where that reed and that tuner is going to be stable. And that's where I need to tune my drums to. It's really easy for folks to kind of underblow when they're tuning their drones. And then as soon as they start the tune, the tuner's shut. Right? So this is an easy way to catch that. And yes, if I go from high A, if I blow my high A full, let me just show you if the tuner's still up there. I'll show you that as well. That is another method of kind of getting to the same spot. Is I'm going to blow my high A near the bottom, right? I want to make sure it's not scratchy. I want to make sure it's a full sounding high A, but near the bottom. So notice when I back off, it's tuned flat. It's okay. But notice when I back off, it just cuts out. There's no big drop. But listen, so now I'm going to go from high to low, and you'll see the low is still in tune. Right? Back to where I want it. Now, if I blow the high A, will I be able to overblow it? Of course. It can go way higher, right? Right? You get the idea, right? So on the top hand, we sort of see the opposite, right? Is if I'm blowing my low A full, I can go to a high A, and it's going to sound good. I can go to a high G, and it's going to be fine. It's not going to cut out. If I'm underblowing my low A, the most common thing you hear chokes is when people are playing G grace notes and stuff on the bottom hand, because they've sagged, and then you bring in that top hand grace note, and it causes that micro choke on the bottom hand. A few of you maybe had that today. It's easy to do. So we're always trying to focus on blowing our bottom hand full at the ceiling, but then our high A, think of it like this. I'm going to blow here. The high A is basically at the bottom. if I'm actually blowing steady, I'm blowing high A at the kind of the bottom of that potential range of that note. High G is similar, right? And the middle notes, like a D or something, would be, I'm actually kind of blowing it in the middle of the range. Is it maybe overthinking it? Some people just get a natural sound, no bother, don't have to think about it, lucky you. But a lot of us need to think about this, right? We need to get this, this sort of the perception of blowing steady to align with the reality, right? And so I think everybody thinks they're blowing steady, right? You're not trying to blow in steady, but you almost need to change the way you perceive. If you are one of these folks that overblows the top hand, underblows the bottom hand, you want to kind of rethink it where you sort of feel like you're working harder on the bottom hand, leaning into it, and then when you go to the top hand, you're sort of floating, you're balancing, and then it's the bottom hand that you're kind of leaning into. And if you do that, your drone should actually be really stable, and you shouldn't hear it. Of course, you could overdo what I'm talking about, but the general thing that I was hearing today, and I hear in general, is people underblowing the bottom hand, getting the drums in tune with that, and then when you go to the top end, the drums you'll hear a disruption, especially from the bass drum. So let me tune my pipe. You can do this different ways. You can tune just the outside tenor by itself, and you can tune them, without shutting any of them off. I'll shut my middle tenor off usually, but I'll just get them in tune, and I'll show you the low A coming in and out with the low A, and showing how it's just locked in with the drums. If I blow it full. Sharpen up pretty quickly when I first put it together, okay? So already I'm going to strike it up. I'm going to bring the drums down just a little bit. Going to blow low A, and where it activates, it should be locked in. Hear that? So it's actually easy, because the low A will not start at any other pressure, right? And so it tells me right away, the chainer tells me exactly where it wants to be blown, right? And that's of course what I'm tuning the drums to. I can really, really sag my low A from there. Right, so the floor is very, very low, and I need to keep it up at the ceiling. Now, when I go to high A, like I say, I'm kind of like floating when I go to high A. I'm not pushing harder. Change my pressure on high A like that, you would hear, oh, it's unsteady, that's not good. So I don't typically hear people do that, where I went to a nice high A, steady, and then I overblew it. What do I normally hear? The sudden change, oh, here comes a high A, let me change right on it. And so if you actually took a sound sample of just the high A, it probably wouldn't really be unsteady. But what you've done is your macro level pressure has changed. And how do you detect that changing? I think one of the most obvious things is you'll hear your bass drum kind of deviate from the bass. So that's the most obvious giveaway. So we need to know how to blow the low A, because that's the basis for like all the tuning, right? We also need to have our drones set up so that they're generally at least close to the right pressure where they're going to be stable, right? So when I talk about stability, I was kind of trying to show you that with the chanter, but I maybe didn't really talk about it. Is it a linear relationship between pitch and pressure? When I blow harder, does it get sharper?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So we know they're correlated, right? Is it linear?
No.
No. What's it look like? It's like a logarithmic curve, like a plateauing curve, right? So as my pressure goes up, things get more stable, right? And the way I'm talking, you might think like, oh, you gotta blow a hard bagpipe. Like, no, I'm not blowing a hard bagpipe. You have to blow a bagpipe fully. A lot of folks are blowing a bagpipe that's too hard, and so they can't blow it fully for at least for a whole session, and so they're chronically underblowing a lot of the time, and things don't sound good. Nothing is stable. You're sort of blowing the reed where on the steep part of the curve, right? So that low A has this kind of pressure curve. The high A has the same pressure curve, but it's higher. And we don't want to push up to the highest part of the high A, right? That's why as you go up the scale, the note feels different if you're actually blowing it the same. Because the low A, when you blow the low A fully, you feel this back pressure, like it doesn't want to move. And then if I went to high G, all of a sudden the ceiling's higher, I could overblow it. I could blow it a lot harder until I hit that back pressure. My drones are going to go way out of tune, right? Well, my drones are going to have a similar effect, where as I blow the drones more fully to where they're set up, they're going to sort of stabilize. They're going to be more forgiving, right? They're going to be flattering to slight pressure and stability, rather than sort of highlighting it, right? So if my drones are too open, what I'll typically get is, because I'm blowing them more in that steep part of the curve, they're going to kind of move around a little bit more. They're going to be more pressure sensitive. So I want to bring my drones down to the point where when I'm playing, they're not going to shut off, but they're efficiently brought down so that I'm fully powering the drones. I'm playing near the ceiling of the drone rather than down near the kind of center of it. All right? Drones are certainly more forgiving than the chanter. The chanter is the most unstable, and then the bass drum, and then the tenors are kind of the ones that move the least with your pressure changes. Any questions so far?
Has anyone like drawn out the logarithmic curves to where we could like, I don't know, see it? Is that like, is it, you know, that's on a website
No.
somewhere?
I would say that I'm already kind of overthinking this a little bit, you know? And that would be like extreme, but probably interesting, and someone should do it. But it's just a general idea of like, I want to be blowing my low A at the top of that curve, and I want my drones to be set to that same pressure where they're not too open, okay? And you'll notice it, like if I take my chanter out here, and I just blow my drones, you'll hear that my tenors, they're set up well. How do we set up our tenors so that they are going to be really stable with each other? How would we do that? I don't want one tenor to move separately from the other. I'd like them to move together. Yes, always blow the same pressure all the time, but what if it's a sunny day and all of a sudden the cloud comes out in like variation 1 of your B-rock? Or vice versa. I kind of want to have a little pressure wiggle room where my pipe can kind of stay as a unit up or down a little bit to kind of keep the sound locked in. So what do I want to do to make my tenors really want to move as a unit, like sound like one drum? We'll stay locked in.
Do them at the same like level on the hem, and then make sure they shut off at the same time.
Yeah, that's pretty succinct. And then make sure that also that the pressure is related to the chanter pressure, right? So I would like my tenors to shut off basically at the same time. And there I've got my whole pipe, all my drums shutting off at the same time. some bagpipes you might find that the bass is a little more steady if it's a little more open. You just have to fuss around with it a little bit. But I'll show you just my tenors. I can change my pressure a lot and they won't go out of tune with each other. That's in tune, right? I'm gonna drop it. They're still holding together. And I brought it way up and they still kind of locked in. You heard maybe a slight disruption and then they lock in, right? With the bass, that range of moving up and down won't be as big. But if I set the bass up right, I can get more wiggle room than if it's too open, right? Now what happens when I sag? Hear that? Now, at the end there, I was actually changing my pressure a decent amount, and they were still staying pretty well together. But I was blowing harder than it was initially. So when I initially put them together, I tuned them. I was blowing kind of more in the middle of the drone range, and you notice how when I moved the pressure, you could hear the bass drop right away. Then when I blew it a little harder and got them all in tune with each other at a harder pressure, higher pressure, when I changed my pressure, the pitch moved less. Right, so that's setup. Now all this stuff exists in a feedback loop, right? And it can be a negative feedback loop or a positive feedback loop, right? So as I get better at blowing my low A at the right spot, it's now easier to tune my drones. How do I tell if I change my pressure when I go to high A? My drones, right? And so if my drones are way out of tune all the time, I'm not actually getting a lot of feedback on if I'm blowing steady or not. It's going from kind of sounding bad to sounding bad. So I need to get the drones locked. Once I get the drones locked in, now I'm actually, it doesn't make me blow instantly better, more steady or something, but I'm going to hear, oh, now I've got this nice reference. It went from sounding really good to sounding off, right? So that, and then, that's going to help you blow steadier, which will help you get it more in tune, right? So these things help each other. And then setup, that's in some sense the easiest, because I can hand you a bagpipe, and okay, setup's good. You still have to blow it in tune, you still have to tune it, right? Yeah, so moving on to, does that make sense, that basic idea? And that's where I think a lot of people, they kind of skip that step, or of like exactly where to blow the channel. And it causes a lot of problems if you're not confident in where to blow that lever, because everything is related to where that lever is. What's next? I can talk about kind of some higher level stuff of like getting the bagpipe to kind of settle and how long that is. That's a bit individual with your pipes. Tuning wise, I think we have it easier than ever to get our chanter in tune, because we've got these really nice apps that give us great feedback. And most people should be playing more often with a metronome and with a tuner, right? They're just like two great teachers for the two important aspects of it, playing any instrument, right? Pitch and rhythm. So the tuning aspect of whether you move the taper up or down or whatever, you can kind of have the tuner tell you exactly what you're supposed to do, provided you're blowing it steady, right? If my high G is sharp or in tune, my pressure's unsteady, and I have a sharp high G sometimes or an in tune high G. Should I keep the tape the same or should I add more tape? What's that?
Add more tape?
I would keep it the same. Because likely, when it goes sharp, I'm overblowing. You with me? So I'm going to default to if there's a range of pressure that I'm getting. Oh, sometimes that note's sharp, sometimes it's flat. I'm going to generally default, if it's on the top end, to aiming for the bottom of it. Right? What about if my B is either flat or in tune? Same thing. I wouldn't touch the tape. Right? If it was sharper in tune, I would flatten it with tape. Because on the B, I want to be at the top end of that. Right? So it sort of helps you a little bit. I'm not aiming, for most notes, I'm not aiming for the middle. Right? On the bottom hand, I'm aiming for the top of the range. Whatever instability I have, I'm going to tune it so it's in tune at the top of the range. And then the top end, kind of the opposite. Middle notes, kind of in the middle. Right? Setup. Okay. So, any questions with setup? All these things you could have like a whole workshop on. All these little aspects. So the next thing I want to think about, this is maybe a little higher level. It's like, okay, I can tune my bagpipe. I can blow it steady. But every time I go play, I feel like my bagpipe's going out of tune, or I'm not delivering the best performance, right? And you get that all the time, even at the pro level all the time, right? You get someone who's a phenomenal player, and they go out on stage, and they deliver a performance that isn't quite there. It's not going to win. It's not a pleasing bagpipe from start to finish, right? So this is what is quite individual, right? If you play a synthetic setup, you might need to play a fair bit longer to kind of get the moisture into the pipe. But you're playing tubes, you can play for a long time. For me, playing a sheepskin, I'm going to generally get a balanced chainer sound a little earlier on, so I won't necessarily need to play as long. But especially if you're playing a sheep without tubes, you can only play so long before you get moisture. So you got these kind of two things. If you're playing the tubes and all that, you need to play longer because it's starting quite dry, but then you can play longer. And for the sheep, if you're playing like a traditional sheep, like a lot of pipe bands would, just a tube trap, you don't need to play as long, but you also can't play as long, right? And so you need to sort of figure out what your instrument needs. And I would say, like, I run a band practice typically with sort of like an overarching kind of peak point, right? So I would be getting everybody together on the pipes, and we're working on different repertoire maybe each week, but with this general idea that I want the bagpipe sound to peak maybe 40 minutes or an hour in. And then for the last hour of band practice, I'm not chasing the sound. Things start to go a little bit, I'm not all that worried. The best bands, they can extend that window of really good sound longer. Lower level bands, they have a very short window before things start to expire. And so what I want to do is I don't only want to work on that the day of a contest or 2 weeks before a contest. I kind of want to practice that every single time we have a band practice. And it's the same thing with when I'm on my pipes for solo things. If I've got at least a half hour to play, I'm going to like try to have this general arc of my practice where I'm trying to really get the sound great, maybe say 20 minutes in, and be able to launch into a P-rock. You might find it's a half hour for you, and where your bagpipe's totally locked for a P-rock. It might be 15 minutes, it might be less, but you're trying to find, if you play P-rock, you're trying to find sort of the general time it takes for your bagpipe to really stabilize, get enough moisture, warm up enough where your pipe won't go out of tune. And if you're doing that every day, you don't have to think about it on the contest day. It becomes kind of a feel thing. You're like, oh yeah, the bagpipe's locked. It's good. You feel it when it comes in. You can feel it in a band too. When like all of a sudden you're like, okay, the sound's there, it's gonna hold. And that tells you if you need to kind of nurse it along. If you still look at your clock and go, oh, I've still got 15 minutes before I play, you know, versus, yeah, that's a common thing in a band where you might like time it a little bit early. Uh-oh, they pushed it back 10 minutes. We've got to kind of nurse the sound along, not overplay. But yeah, so I would say every day, you might think of it a little bit like a church liturgy, where there's a different reading, there's a different hymn, there's all these different things every day, but the general thing is the same. The general format's the same. And I'm going to do that kind of in my practice session so that I'm really practicing working on the bagpipe and I'm getting feedback every day on if my instrument setup is good, if my warm-up, you know, time and all that is good, and if I'm sort of getting a locked bagpipe for 10, 15 minutes. That's the big goal. And then when it comes to contest day, I'm just trying to replicate that. Sometimes, how many times did you guys play today? Three times, some of you? So I'm having to replicate that 3 times. Now, most of the time with the light music, you don't have to play that long to get your pipe stable for 2 minutes of a march. Good default, I think, would be get in the tuning room or get eyeball who's on maybe 2 people before you and start to play kind of on and off for person 2 people before you, and then kind of play constantly the person right before you, right? Definitely for light music. For P-Rock, maybe you could take a few more breaks, even the person before you, but definitely like the back end of the tune, that's when I really want to be playing. So if I hear someone on their tarlua, I'm not cutting my chainer out until I walk up to the judge. Right, that's the time that I really want to be bringing the bagpipe up pitch. What I see a lot at a contest in the lower grades, I just see somebody play. They play their march those 4 times, and then they're like on deck, and I see them just standing there waiting. You know, and then they strike up, and the bagpipe was really good, and now it's super flat. And then they try to tune in front of the judge, but there's, you know, someone else playing the Straspe reel, and they're 10 hertz sharper, you know, 50 feet over there, and there's someone else 10 hertz lower, 50 feet the other direction. You can't hear the bagpipe, and they kind of make it worse. And then, yeah, and then they're frazzled, and then they realize, oh, I'm tuning too long. Oh, this is awkward. What do I do? Oh, the pipe's not quite good. Should I just go for it? And yeah, we've all been there, right? So I always want to show up with a good sound, like my initial strike in to be really, really good, right? And so the key to that is playing right up until when I go in front of the judge. And that like kind of first impression, you know, sort of like you see the audience sit a little higher in their seats when you strike up and from note 1 your bagpipe sounds good. You might be bringing it down a little bit, but I'm not like kind of crafting the sound on stage or on the boards, right? It's sort of finishing touches or whatever. And especially an outdoor scenario where you can't necessarily hear your bagpipe really good when you're on the boards. You always want to show up with your bagpipe as perfect as you can get it. And generally, you probably don't need to tune, especially outside. You know, it's not like the tuning room's a different temperature than the performance when you're outside. Obviously, look at where the judge is. If they're in the sun or if she's in the shade, you're going to change where you're trying to find a warm-up spot. But generally, there's not like the potential temperature issues that you might find in a contest like today. Like that room there, the big church room, was probably colder than the tuning room, possibly. And so that's like a dynamic of like, oh, I need a little extra time to like kind of settle the bagpipe. But yeah, a lot of times for an outdoor contest, especially light music, if your bagpipe's rock solid when you strike up, you could probably just go for it. You probably don't need to tune, especially if you can't hear yourself. The judge probably can't hear you that well either. Just get through the tune confidently. Any like aspects that you'd like me to dig deeper on?
I was curious what the tuning app is that you were using.
That was called B flat. But I mean, for that, like I don't even need a bagpipe tuner. It's just anything with a meter that just shows me the range of whether I'm blowing up or down, There's a lot of good tuners. There's a kid at the school I teach at who has a free iPhone app called Sparrow Tune. It's pretty good. It's free. But it's similar to the broad tuner, down tuner. Yeah.
I have a question about, so weather conditions. Do you make it a point when you're playing a gig to show up a certain amount of time beforehand to let your pipes kind of acclimate to where the room is, or is it just
Yeah,
build
if you
that
can.
time in?
If you can, that's good. Yeah. Gig playing is way different than solo competition or band competition, right? Because it's typically you don't get to have a warm up before you play,
Yeah.
right? It's not about the performance. You're just like part of this larger thing typically, right? It's a little different if you're playing like a party or something like that where you are kind of a featured attraction. You can kind of warm up longer and do it. But if you're like playing at a wedding or a funeral, most often it's sort of like the pipes are just sitting there for 40 minutes and then you have to shut it off. Wow. Right? And you can, again, this is a situation where you hear really good players sound really bad. Right? And it's something like, I don't know, I think it can be really engaging where you're sort of not checked out if you focus on the sound. That's what I like about the bagpipes. I could play Amazing Grace like for the 1,000th time, and no, I'm not getting like the hairs on my neck are not standing up playing Amazing Grace anymore. But I can still be really engaged in trying to have the sound be perfect. Some of that's blowing, and some of it's like the setup, right? And so if I'm playing a gig where I'm going to have to wait, I don't want to tune up for long at all. I want to fire up my pipe and get it in tune as quickly as possible and set it down. If I can get my bagpipe in tune in 30 seconds, great. It'll be out of tune in 3 minutes, but I only need to play for 2.5 minutes, right? And it'll be in tune when I start. If I play for 5 minutes, it'll likely take 5 minutes for it to come back up. Now the best way for them to be stable that I found if I'm going to do a gig is I might play at home before I leave, and then leave everything together, and then the chainer reed's gotten the moisture, and then when I get there, I'll do that quick kind of insta-tune, and then just leave. Now, if you got a lot of time, you want to get there an hour early, yeah, you could let your pipe acclimate in, whatever room it is, and you want to do that a little bit. If it's like 90 outside and 65 inside, sure, take a little time to let your pipe sit before you do the quick tuning. But that's a general kind of idea. These caps, though, they do kind of help, where you can kind of get away with just firing up the pipe and it's kind of good right away. But quick tune, if you don't have warm up, and it should be, your instrument should just be set up so it sounds good for 3 minutes. And then don't worry after that. And so you just need to have a good sound right away. If you spend 5 minutes trying to move all the tape and then get the drums, my instrument will not be in tune when you start. Yeah.
What do you do in the final tuning room? And if that's really individual, I guess what would you recommend people do?
In the final tuning room, that's typically when you would get your tune if you're submitting multiple tunes. So I would typically be able to play through my tune all the way, right? Because the person before me, they're tuning for 4 minutes, let's say, on top of that. So I would typically have time to play through my whole tune. And I am tuning as I go, right? Like I'm trying to make sure the drones are always in tune. So if I notice that they're a little flat to the chainer, I'm going to retune, right? And the goal here is to if the drones are slightly off, I'm not getting feedback on if other chainer intervals are off. So I need the drones to be locked with low A so that I can hear, oh, the D's a little sharp or whatever, and I can adjust it. With the chainer, I'm not necessarily trying to move any pieces of tape until I get it. If something's wild, yeah, I'll move it right away. But I'm generally not trying to move any tape until I've played for 15 minutes or whatever my kind of stable point is. And then if something's still out, then I'll move it. But I'm not trying to move stuff right away because likely they'll come right back, right? And if it's a totally different environment, then I've, been playing in, I would, of course, be quicker to make adjustments, right? So like if the elevation's way higher and I'm playing there for the first time, well, I'm gonna just flatten the top end right away. I know it's gonna be really sharp. It's not gonna come in, right? So I'm gonna make quick adjustments. But that's why it's great to, if you can, play in a similar environment the day before, so that you just have the confidence on the day. You don't need to tinker with stuff. The sound should just come right back. So what am I doing? I'm playing through the whole tune, whatever it is, MSR, B-Rock, or whatever. But I'm maybe stopping a little more often at the beginning of it, and then, like I said, kind of the back end of my time in the tuning room, I really want to be blowing the pipes the whole time. Now, the other issue is you might have figured out exactly how to get the perfect bagpipe. You need 20 minutes of play, right? But you actually didn't get to play a lot over the last 2 weeks. Your life was kind of crazy. And then you also had a march, and Instrastate, and everything was an hour apart. And you're like, I don't know if I'm going to make it through, right? Your pipe's too hard, and you need to fix that. Because you always want to be able to walk off and be able to play another full P-rock. Like, I don't want to be up against the ropes when I'm playing. I want to feel comfortable, because my hands will not be relaxed if I'm struggling to get through the tune, right? But too late for the new easier read. What do? I would say you got to know yourself. You got to be able to get through your tune strong without losing your lip. And if your bagpipe goes a little bit out of tune by the end, that's better than like struggling and getting all these chokes and stuff. It's like your bagpipe will sound worse if you can't blow it steady, right? So even if you crafted the perfect warm-up for your instrument, if you don't have enough stamina to make it to the end, you're better off having a bad warm-up, having a bagpipe that starts really in tune. You always have to start in tune. But if it goes a little bit out of tune, that's forgivable as long as it's still stable and a good tune. So that's the other thing you have to think about, is you have to know yourself. Know what your usual warm-up is and what you can handle. How do you prepare for a contest day where you might be playing for 2 hours? Do you have 2 hours to play every day? Probably not. So what do you do?
Play as much as you can, as often as you can.
What's that?
Play as much as you can, as often as you can.
Yeah, and I think one easy way to play the same bagpipe, but be able to play for a half hour and get an hour's worth of stamina work is just not touch the bagpipe. Like, don't push it up, don't stop it, right? Playing for like a half hour straight is probably equal to an hour with lots of stops and starts, right? So with your practice sessions, if you can not touch your bagpipe, not push it up, or push it up but don't stop and start, that's going to be really helpful for your stamina. You're going to get a lot more stamina than the time you're putting in. On the flip side of that, on a contest day, couldn't you do the opposite? When I'm in the tuning room, I'm playing the P-Rock, getting a run through it, I can stop and start a lot. And even stopping for 5 seconds and then striking in again. It's amazing how much easier it is, weirdly easier, than just playing straight through. And it's not enough of a stop to like actually change like the bagpipe, right? It's gonna come right out very much, right? So that's an easy thing to remember, is on a contest day, you can actually stop and start more often than you normally do, and it just makes it easier. And I often have the music out, if it's a P-Rock, just to kind of give that visual check-in with the tune. Sometimes your memory plays tricks on you when you start to think about the tune all of a sudden, instead of just being on autopilot, like a regular practice maybe. Not that you shouldn't be thinking about your tune in practice, but it is kind of easy in practice sessions sometimes to be too autopilot. And then on a contest day, all of a sudden you're thinking about it and you're like, wait a second, what's the name of this tune? Wait a second, how's the third part go? Is it an E grace note or is it a G grace note? And so having the music out there, even if you don't look at it, it's there for any of those kind of panic moments. But you just kind of refresh that visual memory. And yeah, like playing in the highest level contest, like the clasp or the Glenfiddich or whatever, like it's kind of what everyone does. These guys are playing in a tune that they've played for 20 years. And they played amazingly. And they've got the music out in the tune, right? It's just a great, like, kind of thing to settle your mind, settle yourself, help to focus. So I would just have a book of your tunes ready to go, just in case if you're sort of scrambling to figure out if that's a G gradient or an E gradient now and you're panicking, all of a sudden your stress level's really high. You know, you're trying to stay really relaxed on the day. Any other questions?
So you made a comment about playing a reed that's too hard, right? So how would you find the easiest viable reed for you?
Okay, good question. I would say for most people, it's a little bit related to their pressure stability, right? So if I'm like real unsteady with my arm and I sort of spike on certain notes, then I'm going to need a harder reed to withstand that, okay? So, and then I'm going to need to set my drones harder because every time I spike, oh, that drone reed was shutting off. Now I need to open it up. And so the more like extreme my spikes are, the more I have to open my drone reeds up. And as I bring my spikes down, I can then ease up my drums, right? So if I'm really, really steady, I can play an easy channel reed. If I'm in a pipe band, it's a little harder to play as easy of a reed because you can't hear yourself to the same level, and you want something that you can just kind of lean into a little bit more. Plus, I always find the group energy of a pipe band makes that reed that feels hard on my own, feel fine in the band. A lot of times I want a reed that almost feels too easy when I blow it for a minute, but then when I play for an hour, by the end I'm still sweating. It's just right, you know? So you need a reed that has enough resistance that it's stable to your pressure ability. Right? So if I'm playing a reed that's a little too soft and like my pressure's a little unstable, that reed will move more. Right? And then sometimes, I had this one time where I found like what I thought was like the ultimate reed because it was like super easy and it like didn't sound like hollow and dull and everything. And I played it at a contest, you know, and I broke into the reel and the nerves were on, and woo, just the slightest pressure going up made the whole channel go really high. And so I realized, okay, even if I can do that in practice, I need something with a little more resistance when the pressure's on, right? So some of that's just kind of playing around with it. But I would say a lot of people, the issues are they're playing a pipe that's too hard. So they're underblowing it, they're choking, drones aren't stable, etc. You want a pipe that's like easy to wind for 45 minutes for sure. And the issues like if I spike, my drone shuts off, should I then open it up? Or should I maybe just go back and try not spiking? You know, so a lot of times at a band practice, oh, your drone's off, let me open it up. And that's a quick fix for a band practice or something like that, but it's not really helping you develop your pressure. So a lot of times if someone's has a drone that's shutting off, okay, it's shutting off because you're wailing on the pressure on the top end. So let's keep it shutting off. And that's going to be a really obvious sign that you overdid it. And in 2 weeks' time, if you're still doing it, I can open it up. Likely, you'll have figured out how to blow actually a little bit steadier and avoid that. Another test for a reed is like, I'd like to kind of be able to play like a line of music, roughly, without, like mouth blow it, you know? So, just about a line before my face turns purple, you know? But something like that, to me, is like a pretty good strength. And when I blow, I guess the last thing I could talk about, I didn't really talk about this. For stability, What would you say is the optimal way to blow, squeeze a bagpipe? Like, how long should I blow? How long should I squeeze? That kind of thing.
I've heard everything from 60-40 to 50-50 and a bunch of different numbers from that.
Yeah. So, but most people would probably say you should blow more than you inhale or whatever. My thinking is basically your exhale, that's related to, obviously the size of your lungs, but it's related to the strength of your bagpipe. So if my bagpipe's harder, I can't blow as long, right? If my bagpipe's easier, I'll be able to blow longer. But when I inhale, is that related to the strength of bagpipe I'm playing? No. So I always want my inhale to be quick. So I'm not thinking that, I think it's a nice starting point maybe to think 60-40 or some number. I'd be more like 80-20 or 90-10. But like I want to think less about that and a little bit more, but that will get you kind of close. But I want to think a little bit more of just, I'm going to blow until it's inefficient to keep blowing, right? And then I'm going to squeeze as short as possible because I can really take a quick in. Right? Not frantic, but like nice and quick. And I should be able to blow my bagpipe decently well, just blowing and not squeezing. It's going to dip every time I squeeze. But that's a great way of getting rid of the arm because the arm, overusing the arm is what causes most of the issues. Right? Because what if my bag's partially compressed? Now if I just pull my arm off just a little bit, you get a massive dip, right? Or if my bag's full and I wail on it with my arm, I can get a massive sudden spike. But if my bag's full, I stop blowing and don't squeeze, I'm going to get a gradual dip, but it's going to be kind of a soft dip. And also if I'm, my bag is full, I blow, like, even try to surge my blowing pressure. It really doesn't move much. I can't get it to move nearly as much as with my arm, right? So I want to I don't want to overuse my arm. Plus, where are my finger muscles? My arm. The more tense my arm is, it's very, very hard to kind of divorce my finger muscles from the tension, right? An analogy that does not work very well for my kids, but I think is very useful, is driving a stick shift. I don't want to ride the clutch. I want to be on the gas, right? And then when I run out of RPM, when I run out of breath, I'm going to ease on the bag, ease right back off. I want to do that quickly and efficiently. Smoothly, but quickly. And then be relying on the breath. So I'm just going to do a weird thing here where I'm going to blow my bagpipe without without squeezing at all. And I would like a bagpipe that's easy enough that I can probably do this without it cutting out. We'll see. But I'm able to do it, right, for 30 seconds maybe. That's another way of seeing if your bagpipe's the right strength. Okay, because if I can't do that, it's going to be really difficult to keep my instrument going for a long time. I'm going to be using my arm, instead of using my arm to maintain sound, I'm going to be using my arm to produce sound. And then I'm in like a losing battle with my instrument. Okay, so then what I do is I move from that, I've kind of like realized, oh, I can blow my bagpipe pretty steady without my arm. Now I'm going to use my arm to kind of take a little bit more relaxed breath and, obviously squeeze. But the thing is, when I take a short breath, I don't need to squeeze very hard, right? We all know that the longer you squeeze, the harder you have to squeeze, right? Cutoff. That's kind of the only time that you actually have to squeeze for a long time. You do have to squeeze quite hard by the end of that cutoff. But if the shorter my inhale is, the quicker I'm just blowing my arm back to that full bag. And as you can see, you can blow a great sound on the bagpipe with a full bag. You don't need to squeeze to produce the sound, right? I do need to squeeze to maintain the sound when I take a breath. Make sense? Now, some people maybe blow a little too long. Most people, maybe it's too short. I think the biggest issue is too long inhales. So you ride in the bag too low, you're working too hard. By the time you finally blow the bag full, you're already out of breath and you need to squeeze, so you're just constantly on the bag. Okay? I think that's the biggest issue. Easy solution, really quick inhale. You won't hardly deflate that bag. You won't have to squeeze very hard because the bag's still pretty full and you can just get right back to that full bag. Okay? The other issue though would be someone trying to blow too long and they're just not quite able to maintain the pressure by the end. If you take a big breath, you're actually kind of using muscles to hold your breath in, and then you relax, a bunch of that comes out. So like the beginning of a breath, exhale, it's actually really easy. You don't have to work that hard. And the longer, like I'm blowing, I'm working harder and harder down here. And there becomes a point when it's just not efficient. So I'd be better off to take a breath and then go back to blow. So that's why I don't love the idea of necessarily a ratio, but just the idea that your inhale should be efficiently quick, not frantic, but efficiently quick, and your exhale, again, should be efficiently long. Stop when it becomes inefficient to maintain, right? If I play my band bagpipe, I think I would be inhaling the same, amount of time, but I'd be exhaling over a shorter amount of time because the instrument is, say, 15% harder than my solo bag. I would, because it's harder, even that short inhale, I'm using more of the bag. I'm deflating the bag a bit more. I'm having to squeeze a little harder. So you see how like just having that slightly harder reed makes everything a little harder. The blowing pressure is harder, but now air is leaving the bag faster even when I do take a quick inhale. And of course, when it leaves faster, I have to squeeze. I have to be ramping up my pressure. So everything's working kind of harder, not just blowing when it's too hard to set up. Any other questions? Play some tunes, maybe? What's the timeline? We're already over, aren't we?
No, 57 minutes. Good.
Okay.
Do you have anything specific with your case for moisture control?
So,
I've seen that before.
so like if I'm flying, it's like 10% humidity on the plane. I'm going to use this, right, to keep the moisture in the pipe. It's a little more important with the sheepskin bag because, like, I don't want it to dry out too much. But your channel roots want moisture, right? There's packs, like they'll keep it at roughly 84%, something like that. That's ideal. What do I do in Scotland? I'm definitely not putting it in a plastic bag in Scotland, right? In fact, I might do some things over there. Like since I have a zipper on my bag, I might air my bag out for 15 minutes after I'm done playing, right? So I'm just kind of keeping in mind the conditions that I'm dealing with, and I'm aware of like whatever humidity I'm playing in, that kind of thing, and trying to counteract that a little bit. So Scotland, wet, cold, lots of moisture. That's really why I play tubes to the drums in Scotland. I don't find I need it over here so much, especially outside. But I'm sort of thinking, okay, I'm just going to do what I do in Scotland all year round. But in Scotland, I'm definitely only using the trash bag on the way over there. It never goes in the trash bag. But it's an easy thing to put your pipes in the trash bag if you know you can't practice for like a week or something like that. I wouldn't do that with the chanter caps and stuff like that. That's really just if you had a sheepskin bag. Okay? Because if you put this like with no airflow or whatever, it'll mold. And if you're not going to play it for 2 weeks, you probably don't even want this on. Just put a regular cap on, and then the day before you want to start playing again, you can put the moisture cap on. Because too much moisture and not enough airflow is always going to give you mold. I find if you play every day, you'll rarely get mold. If you are getting mold, you're putting it away too wet. But typically, just the airflow of playing every day, you're not gonna get any mold growth. It usually will happen if, like, you play a St. Patrick's Day gig, and then, day of it, put it away really wet. You're sick of bagpipes, don't wanna look at them. For 3 or 4 days, you come back to it and you replay. Typically, that's what happens, is you put it away wet and then you didn't play it for a little while. Any other questions?
Can you tell us about your bagpipe?
Yeah, okay. So this is immaterial. I remember going to this artist lecture in Pittsburgh at the Carnegie Art Museum. And it was a photographer, and he was kind of doing a life retrospective of the photos, and he was describing the backstory of a lot of these photographs and stuff. And he got to the end of the whole thing, and he said, "Any questions?" And it was all these photographers like, what camera were you doing it on? What were you doing? And he's like, "No, stop! I'm not answering anything. I'm not saying that." But I will say, in general, like, that doesn't matter, because like everyone's doing different things, and they're all doing well with different things. What I like it, and I like it enough to like choose it, right? So I think it does matter for me, but someone else is going to do something different and get a better sound maybe. So what I've got, the bagpipes are an old set of lorries with a Henderson bottom section, because a lot of the lorries are quite wide. So they're about like 1910 era, maybe 1915, like kind of, or just before World War I. And they've had the ivory taken off. I've never heard of anyone having issues with international travel, except for a couple kids that advertised that they had antique ivory, but it's just a little safer. And it's a little bit of I've got Atherton stocks right now, just because I haven't tied them in the lorries.
So you've got large stocks?
I have them, but
Yeah.
I just haven't like switched them over, I have a tube trap. It's like one of these split stock ones, right? And it's got, so that's kind of what you want for a sheepskin. So it's an easy way of taking the tube out. And it's kind of gross. Hi everyone. Hi all 8 people watching. But it's got a trap dry there. And it kind of collects, it keeps, more moisture on this side of the tube than a regular tube trap. So then when I dump it, I'm getting more moisture out. And that's another thing I'm thinking about, is I'm not dumping typically with the solo pipe, I'm not dumping until I am happy with the sound. And then I start dumping. So like, I'll always dump, like say before I walk out and play. If I'm
Because then
indoors.
you've
If I
reached that
say
limit.
like final tuning.
Yeah.
At the point when I'm like, oh, my bagpipe's good, I start dumping. Ideally, that happens right at the end of final tuning. I haven't overplayed at all, but it might be midway through final tuning. I'm like, okay, this is it. I start dumping, because I want to maintain the moisture level where I'm at. But initially, I'm trying to get moisture into the bagpipe. In a band setting, it just depends. Like if it's a rainy day, or cold day, I'm going to dump immediately.
Sure.
Right away, through the whole time. And if it's a hot day like Chicago games, I'm not going to dump at all. So I want moisture. So I'm just a little bit aware of the environment. And sometimes you get it wrong. And you walk off and everything's soaked. But with experience, you'll just start to kind of think about the environment you're in. Hot day, you probably don't need to dump. Cold day, you probably need to dump sooner. But in general, like if it's an indoor contest, pretty normal levels of temperature and humidity, I'll probably not dump at all until I'm happy with where the sound is. And then to extend that window of good sound, I'll be dumping. Anything else? Does that answer the question? Okay, I didn't get very far. So it's old lorries, and then it's a Lee & Sons bag. It's the sheepskin, no grommets, has a zipper. Really, you don't need a zipper unless you want to put tubes in the drums. It does make some things easier. Like when I season it, I can put corks on the inside of the drones, so I don't have to clear out the stocks afterwards. But, the zipper allows me to play stuff in the drones. And I play this canister system in there, Bannatyne canister system, and they last a long time. I have a food dehydrator that I use at work to dry it out instead of having to use the oven. My wife's happy. But yeah, it's just these things, right? So the nice thing is the sheepskin bag, yeah, you do have to season it and everything. It gets maybe a little gross. But the nice thing with the canister is I can kind of just pop it out like this. I don't have to do any kind of veterinary surgery to get my tubes out of my bag, yeah. But to do that, I had to tie them in. Channers, I play different channers depending on kind of what reed is going best. I've got a Henderson in there right now. Peter Henderson, the Roddy McLeod channer, I like that. They're made by Nail, like the Roddy channer is nice. I don't know. It's just sort of, a lot of it's down to what reed's going the best, what has a good Peter IG and all that. I'm playing a Chesney reed in the Henderson channer. And this is an Airstream blowpipe. I went my whole playing career, 25 years now maybe, where I've just always thought they looked like lame. The ball joint and the oval mouthpiece and stuff. And I tried one for the first time last year. I was like, oh, it's actually really comfortable. And I haven't played anything else ever since. And then, drone reeds. Those are the Bruce Hitchings reeds. They're like balanced tone, high resonance. Just find stuff that you get. Stable sound is more important than how it sounds. Start with stability, and then get picky with quality of sound. But if you have something that sounds better quality, that's not staying in tune, worse. You want something that stays in tune. Cool. Thank you. All right. Thanks for listening. Plug me if you have any questions after, or if you can't read your comments on your score sheet or something like that.